It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shanté.
Hey, it's Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by the Norfus Firm. At the Norfus Firm, we solve people problems and have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world on HR, DEI, and workplace culture strategies. Two episodes in a row where we knew our names and how to introduce ourselves.
Hey, that's a win. That's what, two plus years later, we finally got that part down. It's the little things.
It's so funny. We got these big old brains come up with solving world problems and don't know how to introduce ourselves on a podcast.
Can't do an intro, can't do an outro. That's the craziest thing.
Don't know what channels we're on, even though we are on said channels almost every day. Where we at? Oh boy. So this is another one of these interesting episodes because as those who listen know, we try to keep up with the times. In our last episode, we talked about, not for the first time, but as a reminder, the importance of workplace culture assessments. And that is where you are both taking in information, analyzing, and determining what to do with your people data along whatever lines you're trying to understand what's going on with them. And so when we think about assessments, we hope that they're more proactively done, right? Assessments in some ways are like cruise ships, right? They're kind of behemoth when you're doing them for the first time. And I say cruise ships because I watch them from, my balcony, from moving from the port. And once they start moving, they don't pivot quickly, right? Like they don't really pivot at all. Like watching a cruise ship is like a high rise on its side trying to turn around a very small space. And so that's how some of these assessments are. Once you get going, like once you open that box, and you start asking questions, it doesn't get closed, right? And you got to work your way through it. But today we're talking about audits. And audits are a little bit more reactive, right? Audits are, you're looking at your current practices to understand whether they comply with certain standards. In this instance, we're talking about audits of looking at whether or not your people practices comply with employment laws in a very anti-DEI world that we live in. Really, the world isn't anti-DEI. That's dramatic. Our president is anti-DEI and has cohorts that believe his rhetoric. Many people still are very pro-DEI. In fact, most people we talk to are. So, sometimes I get a little dramatic. Let me put the issue where it sits. But it's a big issue because the person who's anti-DEI has a lot of power.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of resources.
Yeah. And so this has caused what? From what you've seen.
Havoc. All this mis and disinformation has turned people, they don't know which end is up.
Mayhem, melee.
Yeah,
what other words?
It's a mess. But it's funny because, it feels like a lot of Chicken Little, like the sky is falling. But then when you really look at what's happening, the base, the foundation is still very much appropriate and applicable to culture and organizations and business. So, I mean, again, we've talked about this ad nauseum about in terms of like what's really going on, which we know, but that's another episode. But I think what people are reacting to now is this sense of, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to get caught out here bad, basically. Like, am I in compliance? Am I doing what I need to do in this organization? Am I shored up enough? Am I protected? Because people don't feel safe. I think that's really, honestly, the baseline of all this is that people don't feel safe, especially in particular organizations around like this what feels like anti-people type rhetoric that's out here now.
And when you say people don't feel safe, like how is that showing up? Like, what do you mean?
They are willing to, they're willing to make decisions that aren't in their best interest. Just like in the world, like people are making decisions individually that aren't in their best interest. And also organizations are making decisions that are not in their best interest, reacting to what's happening now. Because again,
there's a lack of certainty
there's a lack of certainty. There's a fear that they're going to be attacked, or they're going to be pursued, persecuted. Like all these things, you see the headlines across the board, from education to big business, all the various industries that seem like they're under attack, and so people are scared, rightfully so. No one wants to deal with the government coming in and scrutinizing all this stuff, right? And so I think people are just in this space of panic and reacting to this to make sure that they're okay. I mean, we talk about this all the time in terms of what you see from lawyers online, which is your thing. You're like, but wait, y'all supposed to know what's going on here from a compliance and legal perspective. Why are you feeding into this? Do you want to talk about your reaction to some of that?
Yeah, it's sad, because I realize that my view is right now not the loudest, and my view really is some of this stuff is so far-fetched just from a pure resource standpoint, right? Like, meaning like, yeah, you can keep throwing out these things that make people scared, and you're loud about it and wrong about it and in power about it, right? So of course people are going to react, but the reality is that so much of what's being thrown out there is just being thrown out there, and there just aren't even enough people to do all the things that are being thrown out there. But what I realize is that while something may not be probable, it's possible, and the possibility is what's causing a lot of the havoc. And with my lawyer brethren and sisterin, it's been really disappointing for me, because I feel like we would be on the front lines of explaining how some of this is just gibberish. And largely, there's still a lot of hysteria coming from a lot of lawyers I see. We've seen huge, well-established law firms sort of kowtowing to these threats, which is really devastating as a lawyer and someone who's like trained to protect the law and the Constitution, that these law firms just capitulate, right? Like, it just doesn't even like make sense in my brain, other than talking to some lawyers that I have always had a great deal of respect for, and hearing things that I realize hit people harder than you think. Right? Like one of those conversations recently was about someone whose husband, while naturalized, is not from this country, and the fear of, if she speaks out too much, maybe she's putting him in a bad position. And me, who's done a lot of immigration but hasn't, I realized when I was talking to her that I have never seen the passport of a naturalized citizen, says, yeah, but it still says what country he was born in. So when I was talking to my friend and saying, but he's a U.S. citizen, right? And she's like, yeah, but his passport still shows he was not born in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And when she said that, I was like, oh, okay, I get it, right? Like, again, the probability of him getting picked up or his citizenship being challenged. You asked me this the other day, like, what are the ways in which your citizenship can be challenged? I mean, it's really extreme, right? Like, you have to be shown to be a traitor to the U.S. or espionage, right? Like, it's not like set up in the law where once you're a citizen, someone can just easily take it away from you.
Right.
But yeah, especially if you're from an Arab country, which has a country like where her husband's from that has historically been villainized, and so then you're like, and then you hear her guilt of wishing that she could do more and wanting to say more, but not wanting to jeopardize her family. And so all of that is very understandable, right? Like, you can't, I can't be like, you should speak up and put your family in jeopardy. Even if I think it's unlikely something will happen, it doesn't change the feeling that people have in their bodies.
Right. She doesn't feel safe. She doesn't feel safe. And again, that's the base of all of this, for why people are reacting the way they're reacting. And it's all connected. I mean, you're bringing in, we're talking about a DEI thing, and then the immigration thing factors in. And so people are trying to navigate all of these things all at once. So of course we're seeing things, people not really being able to think straight around some of this, because it just feels like there's so many things to have to negotiate and navigate as it relates to this work.
And Everything is DEI, babe.
Every
Immigration is DEI. It's part of someone's identity. It plays into how they show up at work or don't, right? Because we've heard very many stories of people just now so afraid that they're not sending their kids to school and they're not leaving the house. And it's like, this is why, you know, again, hindsight's 2020. It would have been great if we had some solidified standards on what DEI is, because everything we're talking about factors into DEI in some way, right? Like, and so this is where we as a people sort of gave up on really understanding A, our civic duties, A, what's happening in our country, B, how, I'm saying A twice, maybe I'm on 3. C, how we get into, how we involve ourselves in those things so that we don't end up in these situations. Like, it's like we've become so passive. And I know that's a whole different episode, maybe one we'll never do, but the passivity in how we relate to our lives has put us in this particular quagmire of every house is on fire in some way.
Right, right. But to the point of the passivity, I think that also plays into where we are now and why it's important to be proactive about this and really get into really dig into what you have going on. One, it'll give you a sense of control, because I think also part of this is people lose that sense of control. They don't know what's happening. They don't understand how they're going to be impacted by all of this, and so they're grasping for something to really kind of anchor into. So instead of being passive about it and just waiting and like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Is the big bad government going to come in and like really take over my business? And are they going to sue me? Am I going to lose this? Am I going to lose that? I think what we're encouraging in this particular episode is just, I mean, okay, some of this stuff is weird, right? And doesn't really matter, but fine. Let's pretend that some of it is, you know, important and impactful and actually could impact your business. So then what do you do? And then I think that's the point of really looking at an audit in this way, is because it will allow you to, one, gain a little bit more sense of control. And then, you know, just, it's always good to assess, are my people practices, policies, all those things that have like maybe a legal component to it, a potential legal component to it, are those things in the position, are in the right place for whatever perceived threat we think is about to happen with this government.
Yeah, because especially when you think about it from, take out of your personal things that are much different, right? Like, we're not saying our audit suggestion works for you worried about if your spouse or parents or somebody might get, you know, picked up by an ICE agent. That's not what we're saying. No. But when we apply it to the workplace, regardless of the fact that, you know, we see all of this instability, right, and particularly around the rule of law, we still have the rule of law. And so these are the things that we can do today. It's a reactive proactivity, right? Like, you're reacting to what's happening with a lot of this rhetoric by taking time to assess your own practices, right? When we look at an audit, we still have, you know, many anti-discrimination laws on the books. I always talk about Title VII of the Civil Rights of 1964, because most discrimination statutes, local ordinances, and the like flow from Title VII, right? And sort of demarcating what you cannot discriminate against in the workplace. And largely what it boils down to is the law wants you to judge people off of performance and potential, not off of traits they can't change or can't change easily. So when you look at it from that standpoint, we have a rubric for understanding whether your people practices, whether they're couched under a DEI program, whether they're just HR practices, whether you went out and did all these leadership development programs that you want to assess the effectiveness of, whatever it is that you're looking into. We know what the law says, because it still says that. And so we're saying, do that. Go in with an expert, right? People who know this stuff. You got 2 ladies who really know it on the phone, on the
whatever device they're listening to us on.
Yep, on the line.
There you go.
Who know this stuff. And we're unique in that we have the legal understanding and the whole engineer brain data understanding. And so call somebody to help you make sure you have your stuff in order. right? Because that at least can give you the peace of mind with what the law actually is. It doesn't mean people won't come in with other types of foolishness. We're not suggesting that. But then you can defend foolishness with the truth.
Right, right. And I think it's important to really give yourself that level of confidence, so you know what's going on. You work with the people that can help guide you in the right way, and then you can be confident if and when something happens, you know what right next steps to take. And I think ultimately, if we and we're going to get into what an actual audit should consist of, but if we're looking at a silver lining here, I think some beauty that could come out of this, something beautiful, is that we've always wanted this work to evolve in a way that was a little bit more operationalized, that was a little bit more integrated with the business. Now, how we got here is, nervous, but I think there's a huge opportunity here for folks to really dig in and say, okay, are these policies, practices, programs, whatever it is, can this really support the broad organization that I work for? Now, we're not saying this means that you don't drill into the different aspects of your organization that may need a little bit more support, that may need a little bit more resources. We're not saying that. We're not saying blanket it. Like, no, you still need to be mindful of what's going on within certain groups. However, in general, we are saying that even when you do that, because you set your programs up in this more advanced way, the benefit still goes to everyone, even when you drill into those groups. So I think if we reframe it as an opportunity, right, then I think that there's some really meaningful work that can come out of this.
I think your point around operationalizing this work is also really critical in terms of, like, when you do an audit, it also allows you to know, like, how these practices are actually being incorporated.
Yeah, what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, I mean, an example is, like, I had to do a really big audit, I don't know, 6-7 years ago when I was an in-house lawyer on worker classification, right? So if Shanté probably gets so tired of hearing me talk about it, but one of my real expertises as a lawyer is understanding whether someone is an independent contractor or an employee. And also leaning into that's one of, actually, that assessment was, I have done multiple audits, but that let me think, I wasn't thinking about that audit, but I'll use that one as the example here. So, in looking at whether or not the consultants you hire are really and truly employees, or you have the risk that they could be deemed as employees versus not, like, it's always so fascinating, right? Because when you're doing these audits, you have to go and interview a lot of people, right? So you're interviewing, like, I get the list of all of the contractors. Okay, the head of IT, talk to me about this, what this person does, that person does. And so it's fascinating when you're like, they really probably are an employee because of the way you've incorporated them into the fabric of our workplace culture, right? As opposed to someone who's off doing a task on the side without a lot of input, without a lot, and it's sort of like, is this what you intended this to be? Like, from a business standpoint, yes, I'm looking at it from a legal standpoint, but then that also opens up the conversation. Is this how you really wanted it to work out, right? Like, did you think about this risk when you made this decision, right? Because typically the reason why, stuff gets offshored or tons of contractors is because of cost, right? But not always thinking about the true cost. Because if all 100 of those people that you've outsourced wake up one day and, like, you know what? I needed benefits. They didn't make me an employee, and they march over and file the form SS8 with the Social Security, the IRS. They cheated me out of all this stuff. That is not only expensive from a different way, right? Because you have to hire lawyers and all these other people to help you fight the IRS. But if the IRS happens to agree, man, you're about to pay all those savings that you thought that you were making by offshoring it. So the same thing happens with the people practices. Cool, we had a leadership development program. Is it working the way you thought it was going to work? Are you exposing yourself to potential legal risk for something you're not really paying attention to? Because that's what we find out, right? Is that a lot of times there's all these programs that were put in place, to be performative, which I want you to explain performative in a second. and not thoughtful of where they fit in the business. How are we operationalizing these people practices? And you could have yourself out here exposed to a true discrimination claim because maybe your leadership development program focused on, you know, women who are the first to graduate from college, right? And it's like the women part could get you in trouble. The first people to go to college part probably wouldn't get you in trouble from a legal standpoint. So it's
Right.
that like initial like excitement without long-term thought about why you're doing certain things from a people practices standpoint.
Absolutely. And again, it's you got to dig, right? Which is why you do the audit or the assessment. But we're talking about audit specifically because we are framing it within that legal context and that compliance context. And again, it's not to say that you don't still try to support those people, but you have to do it in a way that is, again, beneficial to the large majority of the organization, which can get a little tricky. But that's another episode in terms of how to really.
It doesn't get tricky to me because at the end of the day, the law is clear. You cannot discriminate in favor of or against anyone on the basis of a protected characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
We are not recommending that you discriminate in favor of or against any group based on their protected characteristic. What we are saying is that when you go and you dig into this data to understand whether you have marginalized groups being disadvantaged in some way, you should figure that out so you can go fix it so that you aren't in violation of the law, right? That is straightforward, right? That to me, it's like, it's always been very straightforward, but it gets all wonky because, you know, everybody wants to make, when we're talking about DEI, mean what they want it to mean, right? There are people who are in marginalized groups who want to make it only about marginalized groups. That's not what DEI is about. There are people in the majority who want to take it all apart because they think that it means that you're saying they don't matter, which has never been what it's about. But it's this thing that we always see that if they're not doing the Shanté exercise of what does success look like, then you get caught up in the anecdotes of the blacks aren't staying, the women aren't staying, the gays are leaving. What do we do about those specific people? Which is always going to have you in a mess.
Yeah,
because
always.
when you look at what we've talked about so many times, the number one issue that comes out of our assessments is people of every race, gender, background, religion, level in an organization don't know what it takes to succeed. That is the number one issue. It's not the number one issue among Black employees. It's not the number one issue amongst women. It's the number one issue, again, amongst employees, period. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's why it goes to your point of operationalizing and understanding that you will benefit your entire workforce by understanding these issues. Like, that's all we've ever been saying, right? Like, the companies that have decided to solve with the shorthand of trying to create fellowships for a certain group or scholarships for a certain group, a little bit lazy in my opinion, right? Because it's sort of like, okay, fine, like, go make a scholarship for Black women. Great. We'll cover that group that way. It's short-sighted because you're still missing out on the vast majority of your employees feeling the same way as the Black woman. Now, the Black woman may get hit harder statistically, which is true. We've seen over and over, in which case you may have a discrimination problem and you may actually get sued if you don't go fix it. It's not all of your workplace solutions should only be thought of around what's going on with Black women. And I think maybe I've made that confusing just now, but to me it's very straightforward.
But which is the point of, like, it's the how, right? The how can get a little tricky if people aren't really looking at it from, if they're being short-sighted in how they want to solve for this problem. But to your point, it is very clear. Like, the law makes it very clear, but people trip themselves up all the time because they're not taking either a strategic look at this or they're not taking a more expansive look at this. They're very, like,
they want
narrow.
shortcuts.
They want shortcuts and they want to get something quick.
And the reality is, and I know, again, like, I know this is a common theme here, but the reality is that you don't get into these workplace situations overnight. There are no overnight solutions. So if we can accept, you know, it's funny because I used to, my very favorite job growing up was SAT teaching, right? I was an SAT teacher. And I remember teaching a few classes where it just became so obvious to me, like, guys, like, there are no shortcuts, right? Like, every time we think we're doing something short, it's not done, and you have to come around and do it the long way. And that's the same thing here. Like, great, you created fellowships for certain protected classes, but if your organization, which is what we see all the time, wasn't set up to be inclusive of those marginalized groups, you aren't getting anywhere, right? So you look at all these fellowships that were in existence for like law firms and like services organizations, and it's like, great, you did a great job of bringing in a lot of marginalized people, but your workplace was not set up for them to succeed. So then what do we have now? We don't know why people are leaving. Oh, because this is not a place for them. Like, they don't see themselves here
at all. So to me, so what you're saying to me is like, you can't, the view also can't be limited in terms of like, you're just focused on one area. It needs to be, how does this impact or is impacted by other things? It's a matrix. Like, it's a whole system that you got to look at. You can't just, you can do programs to affect one part of it, but then you still have to kind of look, all right, so, but is that really getting us to what now that we've solved for this, what else do we need to solve for? Because now we have another issue that popped up. It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, and it's like, I think about how we used to laugh, you know, post George Floyd's murder in 2020. We're getting all these phone calls. It was the same top 3 issues. We need more Black people. That would be the first thing. And we're like, okay. And then employees wanted more transparency. That was like the most exciting word of the day. Transparent, transparent, transparent. And then how do we succeed here? Like, those were the top 3 things. And we get on calls, let us guess, you need more Black people? And the conversation around Black people was so crazy to me, because I was like, first of all, we had clients that were like, we want to be more representative of the country, where they'd have 1% of their workforce was Black, 13% of the country is made up of Black people. And I'm like, well, like, mathematically, you'd have to like hold certain things steady. So like, no Black person can leave that you already have. You got to fire some people. And then you got to, that's a wild mathematical calculation. Do you even know if there are this many Black people that do this very specific type of work you do?
Correct. That's a really broad assumption that you're making. That 13% holds true across every single industry, every single job, every single everything. Are you insane?
And so it's lazy, right? It's lazy because you're reacting to what you see on TV of this historic discrimination and these systems that have really oppressed Black people in this country. But that is sort of irrelevant to your talent availability, right? And so how about we just work on making this workplace more inclusive for everybody, rather than getting into this that's a true whack-a-mole of, let me find enough Black people to get. It is the most ridiculous goal to have. And it's because it's like you're setting yourself up from failure to begin with. Yeah. Especially if most of these companies, 99%, don't even have a good view on talent pipeline. They don't have a good view of who's out there to even know if this goal is realistic. Possible.
Yeah, it's not. They don't. And also, for what? Like, why do you need that? Why? Just because someone told you that's what you needed? Does your business need that? Like, what is the business case always for this? You know, what problems are we solving that require this? What solutions are we giving to the marketplace that require this? Like, come on. We're always going to say tie it to your business, always. And so, but just to be clear, we're also not saying don't hire Black people. We're not saying that either. We want to say hire talent.
I hate that you even have to say that.
Come on, because you can hear it. We want you to hire talented people. What we want you to do is make sure you're looking for that talent in all the places. And then when the talent comes in, the talent would like to stay here. That's it. Yeah. That's all we're asking for. Right. But anyway, really quickly, because I know we're getting close to our time here, we did want to just touch base in terms of like wrapping up this audit portion on what you should be looking at. So
we got really soapboxy. I love the soapboxes, but we do have a point.
we gotta run it back though. Do you want to run the list down?
Okay, so we think about an audit. And again, we're talking about an audit to make sure that your people practices comply with employment laws. First things first, we think it's really important that you look at your representation data. And what that means is looking at what the makeup is of your employee population across. We love to look across as many demographics as you have available, right? Their pay, their level in the organization, their tenure, their self-reporting demographics, like their race, their ethnicity, do they have a disability? Are they veterans? All of those different pieces of data about a person help you understand how folks are distributed across your organization, and particularly if you have survey data, some idea of how they feel about your organization. With that data, you want to be looking at, are people promoted equitably? Meaning, do you have consistent standards on how people are promoted? So if, for example, men are promoted at a quicker rate than women, are you able to explain why that is? Meaning, is there legitimate, non-discriminatory reasons for this to be happening? And most of the time, organizations are blind on that. They don't spend the money to do the promotion equity analysis. And then you get groups of people coming to sue. And then you're having to figure out when you're under the microscope of a lawsuit. So we're saying do that now. And really the goal of all of this audit, I should be clear on, is, are you making employment decisions that are related to the job requirements, not the people, the job requirements, right? So that way you're keeping yourself out of these discrimination conversations. Look at your policies. Are they applied consistently, right? Are we really dealing with, we say we do comp this way and we consistently do comp this way. We don't have some back of the envelope thing for some random executive just because we like him. That same executive gets applied, the compensation rubric gets applied to that executive as well. Are you training people on how to comply with the law? And are you communicating in a way that complies with the law? Every investigation I do, I ask people if they've taken harassment and discrimination training. And I have an investigation that I'm doing right now where one of the employees I interviewed has been with this organization for over 20 years and has not taken harassment and discrimination training once.
20 years?
Yes. And so something that simple, and by the way, plug here, if you are a company that does harassment and discrimination training annually, you might want to go and watch it, because some of these shelved trainings might get you in trouble with some of the rhetoric out there. So again, even when you're doing an audit, it includes that. I mean, I've done audits where I'm watching people's harassment and discrimination training that come from these big, huge companies that are canned. And I'm like, you got some problems in here. And because they're canned, they're not customizable. And so now is the time where you might be needing to do some customized training. But you should be doing some kind of training on avoiding bias and discrimination in the workplace, so that people are not talking to investigators saying they didn't know they couldn't do that. When you're looking at your audits, how are you using budget and resources? So if you're a company that has employee resource groups, for example, are they resourced equitably, right? Or does one group get way more money than the other? And if they get more money than the other, is it equitable? Because it may be. Understand, when we say equitable, we're not saying equal, where everybody has to get the same thing. We're saying equitable, which is it fair, right? So maybe one of your ERGs does get twice as much as the other because they have 3 times the members of the next closest group, right?
Right.
That could be equitable, depending on their circumstances. And the last piece, I'll leave to you to describe it, because I feel like this is your world of narrative alignment.
Yeah.
Does your internal culture match your external messaging?
And it's more than just even the words on a page, right? It's yes, we communicate, we have comms people, and they get paid a lot of money to put these things out here, sure. But that speaks to like the inclusion and the belonging. Do people live this these words on a regular basis in terms of how they experience the organization. And so it's the narrative is broader than just words, spoken words, written words. It's action, behavior. It's how people feel in here. So make sure that all of that aligns with whatever and is legal, right, compliant to make sure that it's to your point, it's equitable across. If everyone is having a very similar experience as it relates to whatever your culture is within your organization.
Do not put words on page that you don't intend to live by, because those words will haunt the shit out of you.
Whoa.
When I get called to come investigate, this is another investigation I just wrapped up where they had all these beautiful words on the page about equity and belonging that they were not living, and those words were getting used against them in a strategically surgical way. And it's like, you didn't even have to put these words on the page in the first place. Like, you did not have to do this. So, like, put words that you can live by, right? And that you will hold people accountable to is I think the point of what you're saying, and certainly the point of what I'm saying.
And less is more. Don't do too much. Because if you can't support it, if you can't really uphold it, to your point, you're opening yourself up to all sorts of things. And people have long memories when it comes to this stuff. Oh, they remember, and they're taking notes, and they writing stuff. Exactly.
They are licking the finger on the, and they're moving the paper. Remember, you said, it is the employees have the longest memories on the planet. Do you hear me? They remember what the policy said 6 years ago, how long it's been in effect, while leaders are like, everybody's fine. You're fine. Okay. We can take this away. They don't need it. They're fine without it. Okay. So as we close out this episode, of course, we love when employers are proactive. And assessments, when you do an assessment, you're doing it typically just as corporate hygiene, and it's a good business practice, and you're doing it to kind of audits in these uncertain times where we're not sure, where any of these things are going, but we are sure of what the words on the page say on existing laws. Look at your practices within the existing laws to help ensure that they are lawful, so that if you are somehow audited by the government, or people do come in and do some kind of investigation of your people practices, you can at least be starting from the standpoint of understanding that your people practices comply with the law. Make sure you have an expert. We love helping with these things, so please call us if you don't already have one. And to Shanté's last point on the last episode, which is applicable here, communicate with people that you're doing it, why you're doing it, and the outcome in an appropriate way, right? We understand you can't tell everybody everything about what you're doing, but be upfront with your employees. You don't understand how far it will go for you to say, listen, we care about our people practices. We know there's a lot of scary stuff out here. We don't want to be caught with our proverbial pants down. So we're going to do this audit to make sure that the things that are near and dear to our hearts are lawful. And we'll keep you posted, right? That does so much for the psychological safety of your employees. And it makes people feel like you actually care. And so, I mean, you got to do these things. So do them loudly so folks understand that, you're not just going to be, reactive to the things that are coming in the news. You might want to read about Target as an example of how not to be reactive for that point. So we'll be back. We're all the places: Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. We're there. We want to hear from you. We want to get your likes, your comments, your suggestions. Thanks, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Diversity, equity,